All right, we are in for our second video on small groups. And in my first video, I was talking a lot about why we are doing small groups and what are the basic elements of it without going too much into detail. And in this second video, I want to highlight a bit more how that could look like, more the practical part of it. And it's just the first of many other videos where we'll be explaining that. All right, so let's say you watched the first video or you had already something in your heart like, hey, you know what, I want to start a small group myself. Then the big question comes up: what now? What's next? How am I going to do this? All right, that's a very common question. And on top of that question, where do I even start? A lot of people, they might have a desire, but it's one thing to have a desire or a passion for something. It's another thing that you actually know, like, okay, this is how I'm going to move it forward. And that's where I probably can help you in facilitating that a bit for you. All right, so let me explain that a bit more. First of all, let's say you are somebody that would like to start your own group. It doesn't have to be necessarily in your own home, but you have identified yourself and maybe another person to do that. What is then very important? It's very important in a small group of any size that you have at least a core group of people that are committed to what you're doing there together. It shouldn't be on one person's back to shoulders to do all of that just by herself, so himself or herself. So it's important to have a core group of committed people. It's like, you know what, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do a small group together. Because remember, doing a small group, for as great as it is to do life together, like we all know that life isn't easy, and particularly the busyness of life and the pressures of everything that's going on, that can sometimes war against this, you know. So find people like-minded. It's like, you know what, I want to do this together. If you then look at your core group of people, that is like, you know what, these are the people I'm going to try to do this with. Who are these kind of people? What are kind of roles and perhaps certain responsibilities for that core group of people? Well, first of all, it's important that you have a suitable host, somebody that can receive people. So again, if it's somebody's home, let it be a home that's big enough, that is inviting, clean, hopefully, where perhaps even children can be part of the journey as well. We remember we're doing this as a spiritual family. Um, and the host, usually the host is a person that has a certain knack for making those connections with other people. Very important to have at least one person in the mix. Now, if you think like, you know what, it doesn't have to be all the time in one person's home, for instance, but we can share the load. That's great as well. But at least it needs to be clear that at least one host is present in a core group. All right. Then another very important part of the core group is the facilitator. Facilitator can be a teacher, that's possible, somebody that's teaching about the Bible, that kind of things, but it's probably a little bit different than just being a teacher. Remember, the small groups will be kind of connected through the sermons that will be preached on Sunday as well. And for that, I will be posting separate videos, like short, bit sized summaries with a couple of questions related to it that will facilitate in the conversation that you will be having so that you can actually have meaningful conversations about what you may have heard on Sunday. And for those that weren't part of the Sunday, whether they missed out or they're not part of the church family, they have still something to talk about because it's all related to the Bible. And for the facilitator, it means that not all the pressure, all the pressure of having to prepare all of that is on your shoulders. As a matter of fact, the facilitator is exactly that. Is facilitating the conversation where I will be assisting you in that. Very important. All right. Then next to the facilitator, it's always good to have an assistant facilitator. Never go it yourself. Now that might be the host. It might be another person as well. I always say wherever there is somebody serving, put always an assistant alongside you. For the day that you're sick, you have other or things to do, perhaps. It's important that somebody can walk together with you and can also learn. Remember, we will be I will be, particularly from Prezi, I will be posting videos where I will be equipping you, whether it means to what it means to facilitate a group and what it means to even be an assistant in this whole process. All right, very important to have at least these three people, and sometimes they can converge where one person might be carrying two, wearing two hats and doing two things at the same time. But never ever do it just by yourself. It's too heavy. It's quite a commitment where you're getting involved in that sense. So let's do this together. All right. Then the question comes, and I touched base on it a little bit in my first video. Is this what do you do on a typical evening? If it's an evening, I mean, some people might do it during the day if needed. And I already said, like, listen, it's important to connect with each other and to grow in a relationship with God and to get equipped, particularly for the wider world where you are sharing your faith one way or another in a very practical way. We have been talking about that in the Bless series. Now, just to dig a little bit deeper into this, on a typical evening, regardless of how that is sequentially, it's important that you pray. You pray obviously before the small group where you come together, but for sure in the small group itself, it's important to pray. I've noticed particularly that the prayer groups that we have on a Thursday, that there is a big need to pray together. But even more than that, there is a big need to connect with each other. Sometimes we simply share what God has been doing, and then eventually we list some prayer points that we pray for, whether it's for ourselves or for people around us. And then we actually connect with God in prayer. So, regardless of how that might look like, prayer is still an essential part of what we're doing together. It's not programmatic. It can be in all kind of different ways, but it's important. Another important aspect, I think, of a small group is worship. Now, when I say the word worship, I don't necessarily mean somebody playing on his guitar or listening to a YouTube video and singing along. That might be a way for you to go forward in it. That's great. But maybe worship might look a bit different. It might be you're just reflecting upon a song on the words and having a conversation about that, or silently praying inwardly as you're reciting perhaps those songs, whether it's a hymn or something more contemporary. Um, Worship is an all of life thing. It's where the rubber meets the road and where you put it into practice. Whether you're serving people around you that are in need of, a listening ear, whether you're sharing life with over a meal, whether you're serving them, or where you're sharing perhaps a story. Remember the Bless series where we've been talking about. So worship is a lot more practical in that sense as well. All right. Important one, no brainer. We connect with each other. Everything we do, um, we always need to have this in the back of our mind. When we do a Bible study, if we never really connect, then there might be something missing there. Whether we pray with each other and it seems a bit more mechanical, or we just go through our prayer points and there's no real connection there going on. And talk about not just connecting on the day itself where you can, but even throughout the week perhaps, where you're connecting, whether this you send each other a text message, an email, a phone call, whatever it might be. We need to understand that connection is an ongoing thing. It's part of our communication. Our communication is ongoing. You keep on having those conversations as you do life together. As you see, I can not prescribe exactly how you need to do that, but it needs to be an important element. The other important element is that we grow together. I already said that in the first video, is that it's impossible to do the one another's just on our own. And as I already said, the sermons that you will be either hearing on Sunday or perhaps in Facebook afterwards or wherever you might be hearing, watching, or listening to, um, those are the foundational little stones where you can have a conversation about. And I believe that it will help you one way or another to grow together as a small group, but also individually, where you think about, okay, I learned this in my small group. I learned this on the Sunday. Now, how I'm going to put this into practice. And that's where we are accountable to each other one way or another. We challenge one another in a good way, not pressurizing each other in ways that are unhealthy, but we do keep each other a bit accountable. It's like, listen, it's one thing that we hear something, it's another thing that we follow up on it and we start doing it together. And that brings me to my last thing. Small groups is all about doing it together. Remember COVID? We are in this together. So this is important for us to understand. There are several roles. We have the host. It's important to identify one. We have a facilitator, and that facilitator can sometimes lead a Bible study. They can lead just a conversation. The foundation usually for it is a sermon for which I will be presenting also the video. And that's what my next video is all about. It's like, how could a sermon-based small group look like without making it too programmatic, or where you feel like you're stuck in a straitjacket where you have to follow every time the same pattern. It's a north for you to have a conversation with people around you, and I will be explaining that in more detail. So stay tuned as we continue the journey in small groups.